to these new teaching English to these new Afghan arrivals is really going to be important for their settling in. So I'm very happy to speak based on my own time, a little more than a year living there, and a number of years in which I was working on Afghan issues at the State Department. So I'm going to start with a few general points about Afghans and Afghan culture, and then I'll try to get to a few more specific observations, practical things for the classroom. So Afghan culture, clearly the Islamic religion has a profound influence on Afghan culture and Afghans, and over almost all Afghans are Muslim, about 99.8% of them. However, it's also a source of some of their hostilities and division, particularly directed towards the smaller of the two Muslim faiths. That is the Shiite or Shia minority there, which is about 20%.
Jack, could I ask you just to speak up a little bit?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I should have done a volume check to begin with. I'm known for both speaking too loud, or so I was trying to calm it down. And anyway, so religious difficulties also are overlaid with tribal and ethnic differences. So it's important to know that while there's a lot of commonality in Afghan culture, there also are different groups there, and there also are historical rivalries and some resentments. And of course, that's led to violence and hostility. The Taliban, you may be aware, are obviously they're from the majority Islamic faith. They're Sunni Muslim, and they're certainly Orthodox, hardline Sunni Muslims, very firm on protecting traditions. As far as the ethnic groups, let me just touch on there's three main ethnic groups. The largest group, about 40% perhaps, is the Pashtun, and they are all Sunni Muslims, and they are also the base of the Taliban. A second group is the Tajiks. The Tajiks are different because their language is basically Persian dialect. They basically speaking the same language as people in Eastern Iran and in Tajikistan. And they're also Sunni Muslim, and they also are a fairly successful, prosperous group, relatively speaking. So they have a fair bit of social standing, and they tend to be in urban areas, often government officials, very open to education, a little less traditional. The third group, however, is about 20%, and those are Hazaras. And the Hazaras are politically more disenfranchised historically, and they're the victim of considerable historical resentments and hostility from the other two groups. And you see this most recently, the last several nights, I think, have all had reports about burning of mosques. So those mosques are Hazara Shiite mosques. So anyway, just to be aware of the different groups. Now, in spite of all that, they have a lot in common. The Pashtun, particularly, I say, are conservative and have a very strong sense of a tribal code of honor, very strong of the religious beliefs. They're the one group which is particularly a tribal group. The Tajiks are not really, but let's see, where do I want to go next with this? So in spite of that, there's a lot of commonality, and they include a lot of the social behavior, including the sense of honor, I think is really true among all of the groups. And they value very much preserving their reputation for integrity, especially publicly, and as well as their social standing. This includes their personal honor, but it also includes the honor of their family, of their group, which could be their tribe or their ethnic group. And I think we know also that Afghanistan is a very patriarchal society. So this role of protecting honor is really seen as being the responsibility of the male. Usually the eldest male is considered a real authority figure. And this includes enforcing moral codes and even things like rules of social interaction, dress, gender, et cetera. So what does this mean for the classroom? A couple of things, because I think this sense of honor versus a sense of shame come into play in how they interact with people. And Afghans also very much value modesty and politeness. So putting those together, this tends towards a more formal and diplomatic style of communication. And in the classroom, what this means is that you may have to read between the lines sometimes to really understand what your student is trying to say, to fully get their meaning, because it may be shaded in, essentially, it's a more indirect way of phrasing things and of saying what you mean. So what are some cues then to follow on that in terms of what you might actually experience? One thing to know is that nodding may not actually be a sign that they have fully understood or that they agree with something. It actually can be more of a sign of politeness, respect, that you have their attention or that they're trying to listen, rather than that they really are getting it. So be aware of that. Criticism is another thing which is a little bit of a careful point, a touchy point, because Afghans are very careful not to criticize each other or to criticize anyone, because it can be seen as a lack of respect. And the last thing you want to do is to embarrass somebody in the classroom. So that means that when you're correcting someone, you obviously have to be somewhat sensitive to how it might come across to them and how they maybe feel if they think they're being singled out. And even more so if they think they're being condescended to or talked down to. So those are things to be aware in terms of classroom sensitivity. Another thing is, and again, how's my volume coming through at this point? Okay, because I was about to say, raising your voice is generally considered very disrespectful. So that's also something to be a little bit aware, and it also may mean that they also sound a bit formal and maybe even a little bit stilted in how they're communicating with you. Other practical points just might be helpful. One is, in Afghanistan, the main form of greeting, and this is especially for males, is to shake hands. It may be also true between women, but a man should not be shaking hands with a woman unless she extends her hand first. And this depends a lot on, again, how traditional the people may be, or what their life experience has been. If they're from the city, if they are well educated, this gender differences may not be a big thing for them. But people coming from more rural settings, a more traditional setting, you generally, males don't reach out, they don't touch females, they don't even they even watch the way that they look at them. You don't stare, you don't even really meet eyes with some of the other sex. Again, this may vary quite a lot depending on how cosmopolitan people who have arrived in the US are. Instead of shaking someone's hand, the alternative is always to put your hand on your heart and maybe just nod in their direction, and that's considered a very appropriate greeting as well. Also, when meeting an Afghan, niceties are very important. They don't usually get right into business. You probably have also heard about haggling and bargaining in the marketplace. There's usually a bit of small talk before you get, and this may apply as well in the classroom in terms of reaching a comfort level. So that often involves asking about family, asking about someone's health, sort of standard things that aren't that different than what we're used to. But it's an important part of their comfort level. And
Jack,
one other,
you have 1 minute left.
okay, one other thing you may have heard is that, and this applies to shaking hands, but also passing food or maybe even passing things in the classland. They traditionally use their right hand to interact with other people because their left hand is used for other purposes, hygienic purposes. So that's just a particular thing about them. One last thing perhaps to touch on as I'm wrapping up is Afghan experience, particularly for these new arrivals and their experience of decades of violence, and particularly the recent war. I just say that these are still very recent lived experience. This probably all seems obvious, but I think in the classroom, since they may have suffered directly, there may be trauma, even depression in some of the newly arrived students, that it may be best not to pry for too many personal details about their own lived experiences. Let that come out if it does, but particularly as it refers to them, their personal and maybe even their family, because of the fact there's family left behind. I would also be careful about initiating conversation about some other things that might be sensitive, including talking about the war, about sides in the war, about the ethnic divisions. It could still be a sensitive, even talking about the Taliban, there probably is a universal view, but it's also maybe a subject that gets them could be hard for them. So I think that's really what I wanted to cover, and I thank you very much for listening. Again, I really appreciate what you all are doing.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you. That was really interesting. So thank you.
I'm heading for obedience training for my dog, so I'm going to sign up. Yeah, nice to meet everyone.
In that case, could we, oh, he's gone. All right. Well, we can maybe talk about those questions at the end. The ones that were directed towards him. Okay.
So Jennifer.
Yeah.
Would you like to speak to us about needs assessment, please?
Yeah, I'm going to go a little bit beyond needs assessment and talk about also some of the resources you might want to have, and also actual needs that some of these Afghan students might need. I'm going to focus mostly on the situation of tutoring, though a lot of what I'm going to say is also pertinent to the classroom. But several years ago, I just to set the stage here, I answered a call by Catholic Charities that was looking for tutors for the the first wave of interpreters who came from Afghanistan and their spouses, and on special visas that were being offered. And so I was set up with an Afghan woman who was the wife of an interpreter. And so a lot of what I'm going to say is sort of comes from that experience, as well as my experience teaching English at the community college adult ed level. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, I'm going to close the chat. And there you go. All right, so needs assessment. When you get started in a tutoring situation, just as when you are in the classroom, you want to start with a needs assessment. When you're tutoring, this is especially important because they haven't gone through a process of, finding out what level they are, and sort of they have different expectations when they're in a classroom. It's understood what they're going to be studying. They understand that, there's a curriculum that has already been determined for them usually. And so when you're tutoring, it's a little bit different. You're starting off at this sort of everything is unknown. And so it's a very important step, not only at the beginning to get to know your tutee, but also what their needs are, so that you can make the most of the time that you spend with them. Okay, so you need to know sort of what to teach. You need to think about how you're going to teach them. And you need to think about why you're teaching them. So let me start first with what to teach. You need to start assessing them with that very first contact. And that might be a phone call, setting up your first session. And so think about that phone call. Who did you talk to? Did you need to have a translator? Was the translator the spouse? It could be that you're going to be tutoring the sort of the main provider for the family. Probably the husband was the one who worked with the U.S. government, but that's not necessarily so. These are not all interpreters who came in this recent wave. There are people who came for other reasons. So, but who did you talk to? Was the person able to speak for themselves, or did you have to talk through an intermediary? And what can you gather from that? Is that their level, or was that perhaps just a matter of the culture that the husband's going to speak for the wife? Or is that something, maybe it was an indicator of the confidence that this person had? Use those first several sessions just as an icebreaker, getting to know them, but also take advantage of sort of an informal discussion to start your assessment. Don't let them feel that, don't say, I am going to assess you. That might be very, very stressful for them. But let them know that as you're talking to them, you want to get to know them and more about their English and their education. You might definitely want to record the sessions if possible, if they're willing. Use your phone and just to get and on the iPhone, you can use the memos. I'm sure there's something on Androids. I'm not really familiar with Android phones, but just get the audio if possible. Of course, if you're meeting with them over Zoom, if that was the only way you could meet with them, then of course you can, with their permission, record that Zoom session. But this is important because you want to be able to go back and listen several times. You might be taking some notes, but I found the more that you can listen, each time you can focus on a different aspect of their language. Think about how many times they were actually incomprehensible to you. Keep track of that. That's very indicative of maybe pronunciation or maybe their level. Listen one time for just stress. Are they using syllable stress? Do they have correct stress in phrases or in sentences? Think about their intonation. This is something that might be a big challenge for these Dari and Pashto speakers. They tend to have very lilting kind of intonation. Their word choice, their sentence structure. Listen to the verbs. Are they using the correct tense? Are they using forms? So go back several times and listen, take notes on all these different things. When you go, have questions prepared to stimulate conversation about a variety of topics, from everyday to more specialized. So, and each time maybe increase the language difficulty as well. So you might want to talk about, sort of everyday things, and then talk a little bit about what they did yesterday, maybe move to talking about what their future plans are, keep it, what are you going to do this weekend? And then, extend that into sort of what their plans are now that they're in the United States. And then, you even start working in conditionals and things like that if they're ready for that. So, keep judging as you're speaking with them. Can I push them a little bit further? Again, keeping in mind what Jack said, so if you ask about the past, don't say, tell me about your life in Afghanistan. Say, so what did you do yesterday? Or what did you do last weekend? Or something like that. Keep it safe and comfortable for them. Get to know their other languages, because this is not English as a second language. This is going to be English probably as a fourth or fifth or sixth language. The woman I worked with had lived in Pakistan for a long time. Her family had gone there for safety, and she spoke, I think she spoke 4 other languages in addition to having studied English in school. So get to know what other languages, which was the one they used with their family. That's going to be the one, if any language causes interference with English, that's probably going to be the one. Always start with the speaking and listening assessment through those conversations. And then when you get a good sense about sort of what their level is, then you might want to think about starting to do maybe a reading assessment with them. Come prepared with a variety of reading materials when you're ready to do a reading assessment, because just because they're quite fluent orally might not mean that they're very good in reading and writing, and the opposite is also true. So depending on the way they learned their English and their opportunities for speaking, you might want to.
You have 1 minute.
I'm going to have more than that. I'm going to claim 5 more minutes here.
5 more minutes. Okay.
So anyway, you can always look at things like going to that website, Reading A to Z, and you can get, there are some materials that are appropriate for adults, and you can get the same story in different, at different levels. So you might want to use something like that. Do be careful with newspapers and magazines, first of all, because of the content, the topics might be kind of sensitive, but also newspapers tend to have very long sentences, very convoluted. So those can be more difficult than you think. Parents Magazine is really good because a lot of their articles are written in present tense and they're of interest to especially mothers. And it's interesting to talk about the differences in how Americans raise their children to other countries, other cultures. So that's always an interesting thing. With writing, you're not going to be teaching them to write an essay. That's probably not a goal, but you can start easily, writing shopping lists or to-do lists, or let's talk about how you write an email to this, the charity organization, letting them know your situation, or maybe writing notes to school, to teachers, and how we do that. So those are the kinds of things you might want to think about for writing. How to teach them. So find out about their education history. Have they attended formal school? I'm going to let Tabitha talk more about if you find out that they're pretty much illiterate in their own language, what that's going to mean to the way you teach them. You want to keep those cultural differences in mind that Jack talked about. Determine the schedule. Usually you're going to be asked to tutor once a week. Know your classroom. So you might be meeting in their home, and they might not be able to afford Wi-Fi yet. So you might, if you're going to show them a video, you're going to have a hotspot on your phone. Definitely have a little mini whiteboard with you, with markers, of course. Bring something that you can use to talk about stress. So bring those rubber bands, give them one. If you're talking about tongue position and things, use a lollipop or whatever. So you're going to have to be creative with that. You might want to think about, if they do have internet access, set up a Google Classroom on your own. It's free. It's great for tutoring. Establish expectations with them about, don't give them homework unless think about this or keep a journal, something like that. But make it very clear in your own mind what you can do for them and what you cannot do for them. I can only stay an hour. They might want to do tea and invite you for lunch. And so think about that. You need to know, what do they want to do with English? What do they need to do with English? So you might have a better idea in some ways of what they need to do given their situations, but keep it very practical. What are their immediate needs? I went in with all these great ideas, but my tutee, even though her language was sort of low intermediate, her most immediate need was she had to get a driver's license. Her husband had vision problems, and so she had to get a driver's license. For the first month, we worked through the Virginia handbook. And, we went through all the vocabulary and prepared her for her driving test. So that might be
Jennifer. 1 minute.
Just very briefly at the end, make a plan, but be prepared to scrap it and start again. Think functionally, what do they need to do? Think about, writing letters, communicating with the doctor. Are their kids sick? One day I arrived, their child had been sick, and that's what the letter became. So be prepared to teach a lot of that vocabulary. Be prepared to teach extemporaneously. The child comes in the room, use that. What is he doing? What did he do? What will he do? Things like that. Be flexible, because you never know what's going to happen, but be clear about your limitations. Do remember that you are not the social worker. Be clear in your own mind what you're willing to give, and in a gentle and very polite and respectful way, be clear about that with your tutee. And then be sure to set goals with them and celebrate when they're accomplished. So we had a little party when she got her driver's license, just to, as an example. I have some resources on the discussion board, and I have a list that I didn't get to talk about, and I'll add that to that list as well. I'm sorry I went over time, so thanks for listening.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was really interesting and helpful. Thank you. So Tabitha, if you would like to speak to us now about teaching low literacy students.
Yeah, I will be very happy to. So I wish I had had all of Jennifer's advice before I started this, because it was all very valid and we would have avoided some of the missteps that we made. But I'm going to speak about an experience I had a few years ago, like Jennifer, working with one of the earlier waves of Afghan refugees, and actually also working with, there were some Congolese women in our class as well. But basically, I worked with this group of women for 4 months. We met for two 2-hour sessions weekly. I was invited to teach this class because this was a group of women that was not able to attend courses at the county community college, which was what the Refugee Resettlement Agency was offering to the refugees they were working with. For the Congolese women, it was more just an issue of logistics and balancing it with employment because they were working outside of the home. For the Afghan women, it was an issue of childcare for young children at home, and not having other people to take care of those children. And also, I think some hesitance and reticence, as Jack mentioned. Afghan women were kind of just expected to be in the home more. So they were a little bit uncomfortable going out on their own, taking the bus to the community college. So we worked with 10 students, 6 of them from Afghanistan, 4 from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And they ranged in age from 20 to 50 years old. I prepared a PowerPoint, but it really is just bullet points. So I'm actually gonna just kind of cut and paste what I had there into the chat. So you have that as a little visual in the chat. So some of the challenges that my co-teacher and I encountered, first was just that issue of childcare. In fact, that's why we were meeting in their apartment complex. That's why we had this class. They often ended up needing to bring their children to class with them. And so to make class more effective, I think we could have planned the sessions during the day while some of the children were at school, or we could have offered childcare. Would have been 2 good strategies that we didn't do. As you might imagine, they had a lot of trauma from their transition leaving Afghanistan in the Congo. But what we discussed together in class was really much more trauma related to life here. They encountered a lot of difficulties, people being rude to them in stores, difficulty discussing issues with their children's schools or communicating with doctors. They were encountering kind of ongoing traumas as they tried to adjust to life in the US. And then a major challenge was low first language literacy, especially for the Afghan women. They were coming at a time where many of them had not been able to attend school because of the Taliban when they were young in their country, was not allowing that. So one woman had attended school through the 11th grade and did have literacy in Dari. But the others did not have literacy in Pashto or Dari, and certainly not in English. So that presented some challenges because first language literacy is an important support for second language literacy. Research on first language literacy learners shows that once we become literate, some changes occur in our brain. And Robin Barr is going to talk about some of those issues in her session this afternoon. She'll expand upon all that. But literate people, whether it's first or second language, are better able to manipulate syntax. They have stronger working memory. And so we saw issues related to that in that women with low literacy were copying letters line by line and weren't seeing it as an integrated whole. They just didn't have that print literacy awareness yet. Whereas even the woman who had literacy in Dari, she kind of understood this concept that, okay, a letter, this all goes together. I can remember this as a whole. And she was able to progress far more quickly than her peers. We also saw that in terms of syntax, that some of the women with lower literacy, we'd ask, what is your name? And they would reply, what is my name is. And they had trouble kind of, I think, distinguishing those pieces of language that aren't all that important for communicating meaning, but are important grammatically. So that was something that was a challenge for us. But of course, they had a lot of strengths. Of course, they had strong resilience. They'd come through a lot of really difficult situations and they were motivated. They did everything they could to come to class, which sometimes meant bringing their children with them. When we gave them homework, they did it. They were enthusiastic about it. And that included things like handwriting practice that seemed really basic. We kind of wondered, like, is this something they're even going to want to do? They all wanted to do it. They really valued the just practice of writing letters. They wanted to be able to do that, and they practiced it. And they also did have prior knowledge to build upon. So adult learning theory tells us that adults learn best when they connect to what they already know, and adults have a lot of prior knowledge just from life in the world. And also that adults are most motivated when they have a reason to learn, and these women certainly did. So we had a lot of motivation. One of the Congolese women came one day so excited because she had read the word bus for the first time on the bus that she took to work every day. She'd made that connection, and that was really meaningful for her. All of the women, you know, were in the home cooking. And so words like cucumber, salt, garlic was important to them. They learned it quickly. Same thing with introducing numeracy. We practiced giving change and calculating prices, weighing food at the grocery store. We actually went and visited a local grocery store one day, and they were really motivated to, you know, they needed to go grocery shopping. And so that was really important knowledge for them. So some of the strategies that we found to be really important, and I'm typing these notes in the chat as well, connects to what Jennifer was talking about, designing a curriculum that connects to their lives. So we talked about, you know, items in the apartment. We labeled items in the apartment, sink, refrigerator, door. We talked about their families, their children and their husbands. And even they were, once we worked with them for 4 months. So as over time, we got to build a strong relationship with them, and they wanted to talk about life in Afghanistan. They brought it up, you know, and we let that happen as they were ready. But that meant that when we talked about siblings for this group of, you know, women, and mostly in their 20s and 30s, we had to teach the phrase, she died, he died. And that's part of their reality. But they wanted to be able to talk about that once they were comfortable together and with us. We also were really careful about adhering to a familiar routine. This was really important with this group of women who was not familiar with formal schooling. We were very kind of strict about that routine, especially in the first month. So we always started with conversation practice. We'd introduce a new question answer combo each session. You know, what is your name? My name is. How old are you? I am X years old. And we continued practicing ones we'd learned before. Then we would do letter introduction. We would always introduce the lowercase letters to start, because that's what you see more often. And we would introduce letters that had similar phonemic patterns. So we introduced B, B, P, P, W, W, kind of words that are at the front of the sounds that are produced at the front of the mouth. We introduced at the same time to help them distinguish between those. And we used, and Philippa, I know I'm just about out of time. That'll be just right, actually. We used formulaic sentences. The name is B, the sound is B, to introduce and practice those letters and build that phonemic awareness. And then we introduced vocabulary that corresponded to the letters we introduced. And we use formulaic sentences again for that. So the, what was the sentence? The name is book, book, book. Starts, or maybe book starts with B, book, that was it. Water starts with W, water, to build the connections. We also used emergent literacy strategies. Most of those from the research comes from work with children. And so they needed to be adapted to match the needs of adults. We weren't going to be introducing, you know, barnyard animals with these women. So actually some of them had chickens at home, but that's another issue. So we, as I said, we labeled items in the apartment to create a print-rich environment. Once we had gone through the whole alphabet, introducing the letters, we created posters. We did 1 or 2 every session and wrote all of the words we could think of that started with B or with P or with Q. And then had those around the room as a word wall and continued adding to those. So the women who were a little bit higher literacy level, as they found new words, they would add them to the posters. And so it was a sort of a collaborative effort to have those word wall posters. And then overall, I think just the most important strategy, and it comes back to what Philippa and what Jack talked about, was having that strong relationship in place. That they got to a point where they felt comfortable saying, you know, I have 3 sisters, 2 died, is an important part of their reality and something that they wanted to talk about. And so connecting to their own experiences required that relationship, and their learning also required that relationship. So I think that is the most important strategy.
Thank
But I'd
you.
love to hear about everybody's questions and what this all has made you all think about. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Tabitha. That was really interesting. And I just have to say, you credited me, but actually it was Jennifer.
Oh, yeah. That's because I'm looking at you
yeah,
here.
I don't want to,
Yeah,
you know,
Jennifer,
me-
thank you.
me.
Mhm.
So Jennifer, if you could just tell everyone how to access the discussion board, because frankly, it's not obvious to me.
Yeah.
You know what? I can
so-
show it if you
Oh,
want me
okay.
to show
great.
in
Sure,
Canvas.
sure.
That
And
would
I'm
be-
going to add a few other things on there, so come
Yeah.
back.
And actually, so that reminds me, I wrote a paper about my work with these women, and I'm going to share that in the chat real quick here that has a lot more details about what I spoke about. And it's also available on the Canvas site, which I'm going to show you guys right now. So on the Canvas site, those of you that have accessed the Canvas site, it'll look like this for you. And you can access the schedule by going to modules,
Mhm.
finding the session that you're interested in. So here we are. And then from that page, every page has a link to session discussion board and materials.
Great.
So there you can find some of the information that we've shared. And if you have any trouble accessing Canvas, please send me an email. I'll put this in the chat to pd@watesol.org.
And I'm going to go ahead and put my email in there as well. So if you have follow-up questions that we don't get to today, feel free to reach out to me as well.
So please, if anyone has any questions, please just unmute yourself and speak up.
Or have any of you, if anybody else has experience working with refugees or Afghan populations, we'd love to hear your experiences as well.
How long had you each worked with these populations once you started?
Personally, I've had Afghan students in my community college classes off and on, but my tutoring went on for 2 years with her, and we basically prepared her because of her husband's vision issues. He was very limited in jobs, and so in order to support the family, they realized that she was going to have to be the one to work. And she really wanted to become a primary school teacher or a preschool teacher. And so we prepared her to start taking classes at Nova. And so once she was able to do that, I was able to back out. And so, she was able to get scholarships and things like that to help pay for that tuition. So she was very motivated, and we did that.
And I only worked with that group of women for 4 months, from January to June, like 5 months, maybe February to June, which isn't very long. It was long enough for the lowest women to, they did make progress. We definitely saw progress, that they were able to identify letters, write their name without, at the beginning, they would often come with their names written on their palm so they could be ready to do that. But so they started to develop some basic literacy. And then the women that had some literacy to begin with in Dari, we saw a lot more progress with her. She was, able to write full sentences. She really was, had sort of mastered the letter sound correspondence.
Mm-hmm.
And Tabitha, where did you work with them? Was it in their homes, or was it through a program?
It was organized through their refugee resettlement organization that had identified that they weren't able to attend the classes that they were able to provide. So it was in an extra apartment in their apartment complex, which was helpful in terms of them not wanting to venture very far from home, either on their own or with their children.
I can't even remember how I got the email, but I got an email from Catholic Charities announcing that they were having an information session, and they were looking for tutors. I can't even remember where that came from.
Mhm.
But if you are interested in working with this population, if you've been moved to do something because of all the news coverage about the refugees, you can try contacting, and I'll see if I can post in the discussion board some of these contacts, but there's No One Left Behind. There is Catholic Charities, Lutheran Ministries, I think, is another big organization that has helped resettle. My neighborhood, just, our local neighborhood Facebook page, several people through their churches or other organizations were putting together apartments for refugees, so that, you can reach out to them and say, does the family need a tutor? So there are lots of ways, contact your local community college and ask them if they're working with Afghan refugees. So there are a lot of possibilities.
I just dropped a link in the chat to a DCS story that has some links to
perfect.
local organizations. I will say we tried to put together a panel of local refugee resettlement organizations, and they're so swamped. They couldn't do it. So they're busy right now, but there's going to be need to support this population for the next few years. Is when we're motivated now to do it after all of the sad stories over the last few weeks, but there will be a sustained need for sure.
Yeah, and definitely it might take a few months. They might, be, they're experiencing culture shock. They're just trying to get established and understand what the heck is going on. And so even though they really need somebody to help guide them with the language, it might take about 6 months before they're really ready to tutor.
I just have one logistics question for Jennifer and Tabitha. Did either of you have to have the occasion to transition your work to a virtual format? Or it sounds like both of you were working in person.
Yeah, this was pre-pandemic. So, the pandemic has definitely made it more difficult. But I think most of them received COVID shots when they arrived. And so if that's a concern of yours, then I think it probably getting pretty safe to meet with them face to face, and check also with your local library, because there you might be able to set up sessions in one of their rooms, and you can wear masks and whatever, but it's a possibility.
All right, well, thank you so much, Jennifer and Tabitha, and Jack, except he's not here. Okay. In the chat, can you show us again the link you used to access the discussion board? I'm working with the PDF that was sent out, and I'm having trouble figuring out where to find the schedule. So Tabitha, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. So Susan and others, basically we have two ways to access the Zoom sessions and information about the conference: through that program PDF and through the Zoom site. So the discussion board is only accessible through the Zoom site. The Canvas site, Canvas.
Yeah.
So Susan, if you'd like to talk about this separately, we could go into a breakout room and I could show you how to do that. Or we could try to troubleshoot your Canvas access. But if you do want to access the discussion board, you need to accept the invitation and log into Canvas.
Okay, that's helpful. I think my issue is a technical one, and I need to figure out how to access that site.
Okay. Yeah. Would you like to? We could open a breakout room, and you and I could just chat in there if you want. Or do you want to?
I would love that.
Okay. Yeah. Let me open one up.
And maybe there are other people who are having the same issue who would want to join us.
Yeah. If you would like to join, I opened 2 rooms. Let me delete this one. So we can go into room 1, and I'll assign Susan, and we'll just pop in there.
Okay. Hi, Tabitha. Thank you.
Bye.
So we'll leave this room open. We won't close it.
Yep.
While you guys.
Or maybe you can make me the host, Jennifer. And actually, if everyone else is leaving, we can just chat in the main room.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
That might work. Well, thank you, everybody, for attending.
thank
And,
you. Thank
if you
you.
have further questions, just reach out.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Can we stop recording?
Oh, yeah. We probably didn't need to
Yes.
record the, yeah.